If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace, in your bedroom, and onto your bed, into the houses of your officials and on your people, and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come upon you and your people and all of your officials. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron to stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds, and make frogs come out of the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt.
All right, what stuck out to you about those first 8 verses?
It's going to be in your bed. It's going to be in your food. It's going to be in your oven.
All right, so while we're doing this, if someone would look up, there's a verse in Revelation about frogs. You could probably use your phone or something to help you find it. But there is a reference to frogs, and I want to read that reference because I think it's helpful here.
I wonder why the magicians did the same thing. They're just multiplying the power there.
Oh, yeah, watch this.
I can do it too.
So interestingly enough, there's a pattern to all of this. And it goes from, remember he started with the snake, throw down the staff, and it turns into a snake. And then think about this. Did the magicians turn their snakes back into rods? No. So the second one was turn the water into blood, right? And remember, they had to find some clean water to show that they could do it too. Did they ever turn the bloody water back into fresh water? No. And then now you have the frogs, okay? And the frogs, they can produce the frogs. Can they get rid of the frogs? No. So it's interesting. The Egyptians would prefer the frogs to be gone. If the magicians are going to do something helpful, maybe you get rid of the frogs and not add to the surplus of frogs that are now. Yes. Yes, if you have the Revelation verse.
Okay, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its waters was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. Then I saw 3 impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet.
All right, you can stop there. So did everyone hear that? So this is speaking of, this is the trumpets that are pronouncing these are the tribulation judgments upon the earth. And remember last week we looked at it where the one trumpet sounded and a third of all the ocean's water turned to blood. So do you see the correlation Exodus and Revelation have, that these are cosmic things? These are much bigger than just the localized Egypt issues. Later on, that we see the dragon, out of the dragon's mouth. Who is the dragon? Satan, right? And he's followed by the Antichrist. Out of the dragon's mouth, it looks like frogs. And what are we told these frogs are? Demons.
This says frogs catch their prey with tongues, and that's
Yes.
why it would be out of the mouth.
Yes. So what you need to understand is every single one of these things. We started with snakes. Egypt worshipped snakes. They hated blood, but they thought the Nile birthed humans. They thought that the Nile was where the birth of mankind came. And so they worshiped the Nile. And so when it was turned to blood, it was God showing them that he's greater than the Nile. Now frogs were worshipped. If you go to Egypt today and you look at Sanskrit and you look at the drawings and paintings on the walls, you're going to see a worship of frogs, which is unique, right? Have you ever seen a frog and thought, almighty, powerful frog? No, frogs are grotesque, right? They're slimy. It's not exciting. When the princess sees the frog, she's not excited to see the frog, right? She kisses the frog and he transforms into the prince, not back into the frog, except for in the one movie. But here we see frogs, right? There's all kinds of levels of connection. Up to now, how do the magicians react to what Moses does? Copy it, right? So how can we spiritualize that, or how can we make that relevant to us today?
They're trying to copy the Lord. I mean, they're trying to copy what Moses is doing. So they can say, well, we can do that too.
So in our country, we had the Western movement. You taught history, George. And when they got there, what were they looking for? Land and gold, right? Yes. And what were they fooled by? Fool's gold, which if you've ever seen it, it has a name. I can't remember exactly what the name is, but it looks extraordinarily similar to gold, right? My son sent me this video of this guy in the mall that can tell you whether a Jordan shoe is legitimate or not just by holding it, that he's studied it so closely and he can tell. So you say, well, what's the big deal? These shoes go for $500. So it's an important, like, it's helpful for someone to be able to see through and they don't bring in shoes that don't look legitimate. They look to any of our eyes, it's going to look like that's really what it is. And when they saw that gold, a lot of people thought they got rich, and then they tried to go cash it in, and what did they find out? It's fool's gold. What we learn is that Satan's not interested in getting acclaim. He doesn't want, in actuality, he'd rather prefer people not believe he existed than for him to get credit for what he's doing, right? The magicians don't say, we do this by the power of Satan. They don't even tell us who they do it by the power of. They don't tell us who the authority is, and they don't tell us who gets the glory.
They do say, my translation, the magicians did the same thing by their occult.
Yes.
So
there was something there of power.
Right. The magicians weren't doing it in their magic tricks. They went deeper than that.
Yes. There was a spiritual element to it, right? And we're told in the end time, we're told as we go back and look at Revelation, as you study it, that there will be people who come along that do things that are only explained by the supernatural, right? And how are we to differentiate? How are we supposed to know if it's of God or not? How do we find, if someone does something they bring someone back to life, they heal somebody, how do we know if this is of God or if this is not of God? Okay. So two things help us: authority and glory. On whose authority did they do it? So some people will use Jesus as the authority in terms, but they don't give glory to Jesus. Who do they give glory to? They say, brother so-and-so has healed over 1,000 people, and he's actually brought someone back to life. He is an anointed prophet. Like, it's very easy to find out because here with Moses, it always goes back to the authority is God and the glory is to go to God. What God is doing is showing that he is greater than the Nile. He's greater than snakes or serpents. He's greater than frogs. He's greater. Like he's not equal to or less than. He's greater. He's the authority. He's the one to receive the glory, right? And so that's a progression, and he starts small and he's working his way up bigger and bigger. And in our lives, as you're a child, you begin to understand the things of God at a small level. And then as you get older, you begin to realize, wow, remember back when you went from being innocent to now you realize there's a lot of things in the world that aren't innocent. When you get to that 12, 13 years old, I had a friend, he taught 4th and 5th grade. He said, when they go from 4th to 5th grade, everything changes, right? They go from innocent to little demons.
We always said that aliens came and took them.
Yes. Who is this child, right?
Yeah.
But this is a progression, and the progression gets bigger. It gets more intense. And this is what's happening here. And this is the revelation that God is the authority over everything. He is the ultimate power, and he is the one to receive the glory. Not Pharaoh, not Egypt, not Moses, not Aaron, not even the Hebrews. All of them are subject to him, right? All right, let's continue on, verses 8 through 15.
Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go, that they may sacrifice to the Lord. And Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor of saying, when shall I intercede to you for your servants and for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only. So he said, tomorrow. And he said, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. And the frogs shall depart from you, from your houses, from your servants, and from your people. They shall remain in the river only. Then Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh. Moses cried out to the Lord concerning the frogs which he had brought against Pharaoh. So the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. They gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them, as the Lord had said.
All right. What sticks out to you? Stubborn. He's a stubborn fella.
Pharaoh hardened his heart, not the Lord.
Yeah.
He hardened his own heart.
Yeah, it says he hardened his own heart, right?
And they died. They didn't go back into the river or whatever. They just kind of, that would be a stink.
So the first with the snake, that would have been surprising, but maybe he could rationalize it away. The second with the blood, that would be harder to rationalize, but still. And now with these frogs are obeying. Like the animal kingdom is obeying this God, right? And yet still, Pharaoh, when he's relieved, he falls back. Now, go ahead, George. What do you have?
I was just thinking that Pharaoh this time asked Moses.
Yes.
Yeah, there's all of a sudden a change.
Yes.
He's beginning to acknowledge or recognize.
Yes, it's good.
I'm dealing with something bigger here.
So what I've come across in my journey is, and even my own life, God kind of puts you in pressure situations at times, and you start to try to make a deal with God. And you say, God, if you get me out of this, I'm gonna go to church. I'm gonna tithe. I'm gonna share my faith. I'm gonna pray every day. And we kind of make this negotiation. Why? It's a pressure point. We're trying to find anything to relieve us from the pressure. And then when the pressure is relieved, what happens? Those commitments kind of fade away until the next pressure point, right? If the only reason you're receiving Jesus is so you don't have to deal with the pressure point of hell, is that really what the gospel was intended for? Is the gospel Jesus' death, burial, resurrection so you get a free ticket out of hell and that's it? No, it is a part of it. We don't want to lose. It is a part of it, but it isn't all of it. All of it is, yes, you get the benefit of not going to hell anymore, but now you get the benefit of knowing God through Jesus and having a personal relationship, right? And that's why in works-based religion, it's so I don't have to go to hell. I work so I don't have to go to hell. I don't work because I love God more than I love myself. I work because I don't want to go to hell. And here we're seeing this example of Pharaoh. He's willing to submit when the pressure is on. And as soon as the pressure is lifted, what happens? Changes his mind, right? What commitment did he make to Moses and Aaron? What did he say they could go do?
Sacrifice to their God.
Mm-hmm.
But tomorrow.
Yes.
Not today, but tomorrow.
It's interesting. We always come back to this, like, why did he say tomorrow?
He had to have some control.
Yeah,
That's how I
absolutely.
look at that.
He's a real person.
Yeah.
He's trying to bide his time. Maybe these frogs are going to go away without this. Or maybe let me see what happens. Give me a night to sleep on it and think about it. Let me go talk to some of my officials. Like, he's kicking the can so that maybe something will clarify. He's a leader. He's the leader of the most powerful nation. He has to have some ability, right? Yes, control. One of the things I was shocked to learn is the key component to witchcraft is control. Like that's the key thing is it's controlling others. That's why they come up with these enchantments and all these things. It's so that you can control your environment and you can make people treat you the way you want to be treated. And so at the very core of Wicca and witchcraft is control. And so sometimes you realize that is just as prevalent in the church as it is in witchcraft, right? Because if control is the most important thing, and we all at some level want control. Some people want control for power, and some people want control for acceptance.
Why did Moses just tell him tomorrow that they disappear instead of letting him do it? But, I mean, I can see why they wanted to get the Pharaoh, but why is Moses
Working with him?
giving him the choice?
Why do you think that that's the way it goes? Why do you think that there's such a why not just tell them, look, we're going to do it whether you like it or not?
Right.
Well, I guess the way I read that is the fact that it's like, are you gonna let him go? And he said, yeah, but Moses comes back and says, when?
Yeah.
So he was asking him, when are you know, you made
Moses is
promise.
pushing,
Yeah.
but I think also Moses is pushing in a respectful way.
Yes.
So here's the thing. People will, inevitably this comes out everywhere I've ever been, because they'll say, well, God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and that's unfair. But then you read the account of it, and you're like, well, wait a minute. They were very patient with Pharaoh. Like God was doing miracles he had never done for anyone else ever to validate who he is. And yet Pharaoh, think about this. We think it's unfair, but God gave him more signs of his existence than he's given anybody you've ever met. He's given more direct signs of his existence to Pharaoh than anyone has ever had. He's shown his power. He was patient. And then at one point he said, now I'm going to not even give you the chance, right? And so he was patiently leading. The other thing I was thinking about, because in Romans it does say, for I foreknow who I predestined since the foundations of the earth. And that's time, space, and matter, which we don't really understand outside of our lives. People ask me, what happens to you when you die? What's next? Do you float around? Do you get a naked body? These questions. I think those things are questions because we're assuming that you're still the same mass and traveling at the same speed, because that's how you determine time. Well, when you're dead and as a spirit, we don't know how time works. And we know for God, he says a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like days. So time isn't the same linear process it is for us. We're stuck. We are inside the creation of this existence. God is outside of it, and it's a different rules. He doesn't, I even think if you were on Mars, a day is a different time. A minute is different on Mars because of the speed at which Mars rotates. Time is all subjective to the individual. God's outside of it. I bring that up because how much of your life isn't controlled by God? Are you telling your hearts to beat right now? Are you telling your veins to pump that blood through your body? Are you telling your internal organs? Are you telling your liver and all those things that have all these processes what to do? How much of you are you actually in control of? Right? So the very limited part you're in control of is decision making, right? And when it says it hardened his heart, we don't really even understand what that means. You couldn't define to me what that means. What does it mean that he hardened his heart? I've thought it about quite a bit. What does that mean? What would he do to force him to not do let the people go? I don't know how that works. And so this is something that I think is beyond us, truthfully, when we come to these harder things. Like when he says, I hardened Pharaoh's heart, I don't even really understand how that works. And I don't know that I've ever heard anyone give a very good explanation of what that means.
Well, then,
I think it's your spirit.
Yeah.
No longer acknowledging God.
Yeah. So there's some other New Testament verses that go along that path where it says God will not always pursue you. Like there's a point where you reject him, that he will no longer send his spirit to receive you. And that's a scary thing to consider. And that's why it's so important. I tell people, don't hesitate because you don't know. If you resist him and and it's always self-centered. It's always, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't want to listen. I don't want to do it his way. Okay, this may be the last time you get the chance to turn and repent. You might want to take advantage of that. Yes.
And I think that can pertain to the United States.
Absolutely.
He's gonna run out of patience with us if we don't turn and start turning.
And I would submit that judgment is happening. I see judgment all around me. I see rebellious kids and a rebellious society that has no love for anything, and actually a love of self that's so strong that it denies even logic, right?
Yeah, you see self-destructing with these people, out there about Hamas, and they're gay, and they're, in all the, just, I got news for them. Hamas would kill them
I
in
know.
a heartbeat,
Yeah.
and you're out there.
But that
that
shows-
destructive.
But that shows you that it's a spiritual issue, not a logical issue. Because if people were logical, they would sit down and say, this makes zero sense.
It didn't make any sense, yeah.
But that shows we're way more spiritual beings than we realize, right? And Pharaoh was not open to God's direction. And Pharaoh is a symbol. Egypt is a symbol of how sin works, right? Sin will keep you longer than you want to stay, take you further than you want to go, cost you more than you want to pay. Sin is not your friend, it's your enemy, but it is sin is very good at convincing you that it's your friend.
If the sun goes dark and we don't circle around the sun, does time stop?
Yeah, so those are signs. These are, yeah.
The glory of the Lord is gonna be our sun.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna have time in the same sense because we're not gonna be rotating, there's no.
Yeah.
That's why it's eternal and there's no time, because there's no need for time now.
Who really gets into that time thing is C.S. Lewis.
Yes.
In Mere Christianity.
It does.
You talk about deep.
Yeah.
You go, whoa. But he talks about that.
So there's physicists that have actually committed suicide because they finally realized that we're in a closed system, that this is a contained system we're in, that this is something so created and so clearly revealed that there's a size you can't get bigger than, there's a size you can't get smaller than. Everything is organized, everything is fine-tuned, everything is absolutely orchestrated as if we're a snow globe and someone designed it for a purpose, but whoever created is outside of those parameters and doesn't have to live by the rules which were inside the snow globe, right? And the problem with us is we want to attribute our attributes to God, that he has the same limitations we have. And that's why it's really hard for us to understand how this works, because we are not outside of that. We don't exist where he exists right now. And it's very difficult. So good conversation. Let's continue on. Gene, if you would read 16 through 19.
Tell Aaron, stretch your staff and strike the dust of the land, and it will become bananas throughout the land of Egypt. And they did this. Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff, and when he struck the dust of the land, the hands were on people and animals. All the dust of the land became bananas throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians tried to produce bananas using their occult practices, but they could not. The bananas remained on people and animals. This is the finger of God, says the magicians, said to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said.
All right. You have a King James, right? Bill, what does yours say is the bug?
Lice.
Lice.
Yeah.
So, okay, this is
Lice means something different.
this is one of those things where the translation is different because it's not clear. The presumption is lice. Most translators think it could have been lice. The problem this word brings to forth is it's an unidentified bug. Okay? Probably lice, but we're not positive. It's a guess. Okay? It says insect, basically, that when he stretched it out, an insect. Now, the way it's perceived is, as we deal with lice, it's a horrible thing. And it's, so we can relate to it. It's a helpful tool to see how bad this was, right? So it's just interesting. What struck you or what stuck out to you in this?
The magicians couldn't do it.
Yeah.
The magicians said, this is the finger of God.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones that-
They were acknowledging God, and Pharaoh,
He didn't even use his
he's
magician.
not quite there yet, but
So who are these magicians? Are part of a cult.
Yeah.
So they're they're Egyptians, so they have Ramses, they have the god of the frogs, the god of the Nile. They have different gods, deities that they believe, but they, through this one act, are convinced what? There's a singular God who is more powerful than these other gods. Interestingly enough, when the Pharisees bring the woman who's caught in adultery, remember?
Mhm.
And he's in the temple teaching, and it's in the morning, and this is all a scam by the Pharisees to catch Jesus. And they say, we caught her in adultery. What do you say, Jesus? Should we stone her? Because Moses' law tells us we're supposed to stone her for being caught in adultery. And what does Jesus do?
He said, without sin, throw the first stone.
What did he physically do?
He was writing in the dirt.
Yes. Okay. So he got down in the dirt and started to write with his finger in the dirt. Okay. Moses meets with Mount Sinai with God. Remember? And he gives him tablets. And what does he write on those tablets? And how does he write it? With his finger. And where are those tablets kept? And where's the Ark of the Covenant located?
I don't think it's.
It was kept in the temple. It was kept in the Holy of Holies. No, that when Jesus got down on the ground and wrote on the ground, where was it? 100 yards away. God wrote the Ten Commandments with his finger into the stone. Jesus got down and wrote something on the ground with his finger. And when they saw it, what did it say they do? Starting with the oldest, they left one by one.
Yes, because they're the ones that knew the law and knew what he was doing.
Because he got up and said, he who's without sin cast the first stone.
Yeah.
Here it says the magicians recognize it is the finger of God. Do you see the continuity? Do you see this picture that when there's a place we as humans can get to and go no further, and then only the work of God is then, they can't do it. They can't fake this one. They can't go to their deity or go to their demonic powers and get this to work.
that's why somebody's reading this Bible and has no idea about all this background. This is nonsense. Doesn't make any sense
Yes.
because they don't understand what all.
Because if you read it too fast, you don't even read finger of God.
Right.
But then if you stop and think, why did it say finger?
Yeah, I know.
What do you mean finger of God? That has no, what does that have to do with these lice or bugs that now have overtaken all of Egypt? They're not able to do it, right? So what led them to change their mind, or what led them to quit? A power greater than their own, right? This is an amazing story right now, right? This is up to this point, Pharaoh could say, well, my magicians can do the same thing you're doing. Now the magicians are throwing in the towel. They're saying, look, we could go this far. We can't go any further. Hey, Pharaoh, this is this God they're talking about. It's legitimate. This is real. Okay.
It's interesting that they call tornadoes the finger of God.
Yeah.
Nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. So you look at it and you see there's a story that shocks me in the Bible. One of the most shocking stories in the New Testament is when Jesus is resurrected and the Roman soldiers, what do? They go right to the Pharisees and they say, the tomb's empty. And how do the Pharisees respond? They give them money and tell them, share this story that the tomb was robbed. Think about that for a second. They knew The tomb was empty.
Yeah.
They knew something had happened. Their first response wasn't, it's the Messiah we've been waiting for thousands of years. Praise God. Let's go find him. Let's worship him. We were wrong. He was right. This is the greatest moment ever. That is not their response. Yet they know they've just been given evidence. These are Roman guards that if they were to fall asleep or leave their post, they would be burned alive and their families would be murdered. Right? It was no small thing for a Roman centurion to leave his post or to somehow fall asleep. That was worthy of death and your family being tortured. None of them are going to do that. So they knew when they came, something significant had to have happened. This couldn't have been the disciples showing up. This couldn't be a half-dead guy pushing a 1,000-ton or a ton rock away, beating them all up and walk. There's no story that's going to be compatible other than Jesus is who he says he is. And yet we see this exact same thing here. The magicians say to Pharaoh, we can't do this. This really is this God they're talking about. And what's Pharaoh's response?
Yeah.
He says, I don't even care.
I don't want to hear it.
I refuse. It's like, you ever been in an argument and you realize you're wrong, but you just keep going anyway? Because you're too stubborn,
I've done arguments.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're not, at the end of life, at the end of the day, it's not that our logic is the problem. It's our spirit. It's our heart. It's our soul. That's the issue. That's what's the issue that keeps being brought back up. That's where sin does its work, right? And sin is not logical. Sin is it's a virus that destroys our logic to the point that we don't even follow it anymore. All right, George, could you continue reading there? 22 through 23. Oh, Bill, did I skip you?
Yes.
20 and 21, Bill. Yep, sorry.
And the Lord said unto Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh. Lo, he cometh forth to the water, and they say unto him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Else if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send a swarm of flies upon thee, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, into thy houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon they are.
All right, what stuck out to you there?
Give them another chance.
Yeah, another chance. You said early in the morning.
Up to this point, do we know how Moses is getting to be in the presence of Pharaoh? Does it tell us how he gets to speak to him?
Somehow gets us.
Doesn't tell us. Doesn't tell us how is he getting access to Pharaoh? We don't know.
Yeah, we know.
Now we know. What happens?
Present yourself to Pharaoh this morning on.
He says, get up early
Yep.
and go to the river. He gives him specific time and location where he's going to find Pharaoh.
So he's out there washing up or something.
How I come to the water. Yeah.
Pharaoh may have said, I'm not going to deal with these guys anymore. I'm going to get isolated. God's plan can't be thwarted, right? And it keeps moving forward, right? So now what's the next plague? What's this next plague?
Flies.
Flies. Maybe you were in high school, you heard of the book, The Lord of the Flies.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what the Lord of the Flies is in Greek?
No.
Beelzebub.
Oh,
Is that, yeah.
Do you know who Beelzebub is? Satan.
Yeah, or something.
Yes, so the Lord of the Flies is a term for Satan.
Yeah.
Like that's so there's this correlation that these flies were another thing they worshiped. Flies. Okay? What do flies eat?
yes.
Dead stuff.
Mhm.
It's interesting. There's a whole study on this that much of Egypt was built on manure.
Okay.
And that caused for flies to show up. Do you see the symbolic nature of all this? If you build your life on manure, you're going to attract flies.
Now, you're actually saying they physically
Yes.
built it Okay, was that to raise it above the Nile? Is that why you're saying that?
So what I read and understood is obviously we use manure today
Yeah,
for
we do for.
fertilization.
Right,
So they used it in that way,
okay, I just thought it.
but it also attracted
Well,
flies
it would.
because flies feed on manure. And if, there's this concept basically that if you're born of the Spirit, then you will be fed on the word of God. If you're not born of the Spirit, then you'll feed on the earthly things that are like manure. Like your Lord will either be the true Lord or will be the Lord of the flies, right? Interesting correlation. So we had goats at one point, and it was a really rainy season, very muddy. And there was this is when the flies got so numerous that it was like a swarm, like yes. And I can tell you, my Elijah and Anastasia had to help me feed the goats, and it was a horrible thing to do, to go near those flies, especially because it was so muddy, you would slip and fall. But they would wait for you on the fence, then you wouldn't see them until you got close, and then you saw thousands and thousands of flies, and then they would fly all at you, right? And it was crazy. It was a memorable experience that I would never want to go through again. Flies can be, you ever try to sleep and there's a fly flying around your head? Like we watch videos of these nomads and there's like flies flying around. You see cows with flies flying around them. Flies are not helpful, right? Yes.
Have you ever run into black flies?
Yes, that sting you. Horse flies. Oh my goodness.
The black flies are so small and they attack and they don't give up.
Yes.
I mean, you can swat them and they just come right back at you. They're
Deer fly in it too.
Yeah, deer flies will swat you rid of them. Those little black flies are just all over. They're terrible.
So God is revealing through these plagues that he's greater than all these things, but he's also showing that there is a continuity in the world that if he ever stopped controlling it and let it just go haphazardly, how much destruction it would cause, right? They're getting to see a world without God, a world where God lets things just go, right? Where flies have no boundaries. And, they talk about how fast. I always thought this was interesting in science. There are some creatures that reproduce so quickly. And you think about if they reproduce that quickly, just mathematically, at some point they would the whole earth would be full of that. And then it would just pile up. Right? And we'd all die because there would be all these little bugs that died. But all of those things have systems to keep that from happening.
I was gonna say we have the predators that eat that stuff.
And how the ecosystem works, how oxygen works, how viruses work, how God has such a precise system. One of the things that shocked me too, and I thought about it, so when your parents come together, you have the egg and the sperm, and then it gets fertilized. You get the chromosomes, you get the DNA, but it's two becoming one. So you're not getting both equally, you're getting half and half, right? So why don't we get 4 eyes and 4 ears? Why does that just keep doubling up every single time? Because God put into how we reproduce a chemical that stops that from happening, right? There are so many systems in place that we don't even consider that keep the world working properly, that are mind-bogglingly complex when you learn about them. And one of those is insects, and how, because they reproduce so quickly, how do they get maintained? How do they not overtake the whole earth? How do we not have cicadas everywhere all the time, right?
Well, we're going to this year.
Yeah. As bad as it is, it's still not as bad as it could be, right? All right, George, go ahead and read 22 through 23.
But on that day, I will give special treatment to the land of Goshen, where my people are living. No flies will be there. This way you will know that I, Yahweh, am in the land. I will make a distinction between my people and your people. This sign will take place tomorrow.
All right. Interesting. What did it say at the end there? Tomorrow.
Isn't that what he said?
Wait a minute, that's what you asked me to do at that last. It's like he brings it back full circle, right? Yes. All right. So what's happening? What sticks out to you?
Well, up to now, the plagues were all over.
Right.
Now he's making the distinction between my people. They won't get bothered by me.
So where did we hear of this Goshen before?
That's where,
Oh,
Jacob and all his
The shepherds,
people.
This is where, when Joseph brought all the people to Egypt, remember the Pharaoh said, I'm going to give you the best part of land for you to shepherd, the land of Goshen.
was that the best land or the best land because?
Well, it was said it was the best land. We don't know what distinguishes it as the best land.
Might have been to raise sheep and stuff because they didn't like shepherds, so somehow.
Two things to notice. One, up to this point, Moses always had a discussion, and there was him and Pharaoh. This time, he doesn't wait, right? There's a sequence to that too. There's a discussion, event. Now it's no discussion. You're not involved. Here's what's happening, whether you like it or not, right? But probably the most upsetting to Pharaoh, up to this point, everyone's feeling it, right? The lice, everyone's feeling it. The blood in the water, the Hebrews are dealing with it, and the Egyptians. Everyone's dealing with it. Now, only the Egyptians are dealing with it. This has got to be, like, if he had any doubt leading to this point, that's got to be gone. Because now he's controlling it so much that it only affects the Egyptian people, who's he is supposed to be the Lord of, and he's accountable for, and he's the one that they're looking to answers for on that, right? Pretty awesome, pretty powerful. Anything else there that stuck out?
How much time had passed between frogs and flies?
We're not told.
So is this Moses relating this to Pharaoh? It's not God relating it to Pharaoh, it's still Moses.
Moses is always used as the ambassador. One thing to note too, do we see the magicians here?
No.
So we will see the magicians only as being judged. We will never hear from them again as far as them combating. They no longer fight back. They just get lumped in with the plagues. We're going to hear about them because it's going to say the plagues happened to the magicians. But ever since they couldn't keep up with God, they no longer even, like, Pharaoh doesn't call them in for advice. They no longer try to mimic what God's doing. They've quit. That was the end of their trying to combat. Think about it. Pharaoh he's systematically trying to figure out how to solve this problem any other way than obeying God.
Yeah.
Right? How many people I'm going to try every possible thing other than God. I am going to do everything I can possibly think of and wait as long as I possibly can so I don't have to follow God. Right? Because up to that point, God wasn't part of his life. He could ignore God and there was no problem. Now, God has shown up in his life like he's shown up in nobody's life up to that point. Even I would say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he did not show up with his power being evident this much. Right? He's been given the most revelation of anyone up to this time, outside of maybe Noah. And he's still rebelling and rejecting. So let's finish up Gene 16 and 19. Or not, no, we still have Gina. 24 through 32.
Okay,
Sorry, I was on the other page.
I'm like, whoa, wait.
24 through 32.
The Lord did so, and great swarms of flies came into the house of Pharaoh and into his officials' houses. And all of Egypt, the land was ruined because of the flies. Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Go, sacrifice to your God within the land." But Moses said, "It would not be right to do so, for the sacrifices that we offer to the Lord our God are offensive to the Egyptians. If we offer in the sight of the Egyptians sacrifices that are offensive to them, will they not stone us? We must go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to the Lord our God as he commands us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, provided you do not go very far away. Pray for me. Ooh, that's interesting. Okay. Then
Yeah.
Moses said, as soon as I leave you, I will pray to the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his officials, and from his people. Only do not let Pharaoh again deal falsely by not letting the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and prayed to the Lord. And the Lord did as Moses asked. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his officials, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also and would not let the people go.
All right. What stuck out to you about this final part of this chapter?
Pharaoh's not a very smart guy.
No. He may be smart, he's just very stubborn.
How did the flies ruin the land?
So this is another thing where what kind of flies were these? Were these the flies that sting? Were these the flies that eat whatever concrete they use to build their buildings? Or are these flies that are like termites that would eat the wood that built the structures? Or are these the flies that would eat their food and crops? I mean, we don't really know exactly what type of flies. Probably not a house fly, right? That sometimes we put our interpretation in because it's what we're most used to. But it could have been any fly, some sort of fly that could cause major issues. One thing that stuck out to me before I say that, anything else that stuck out to you? Yes.
3 days, it took years again.
Yeah, 3 days.
Why 3 days?
3 days. Yep, absolutely. That 3-day part of the system of God's judgment and then redemption and his revelation of himself.
And then Pharaoh still says that don't go very far.
Yes.
He said 3 days, but then he didn't.
Don't go too far. Don't go out of my sight. Control, control, control. So one of the things I think I work on myself, and I've realized maybe the church, sometimes we try to stand up for God when God can stand up for himself. If Moses went to Pharaoh and tried to have some kind of, God created everything and he wants his people back. And let me tell you how, here's the reason you should believe in God. And that's not what God called him to do. God can fight his own battles. He just wants us to faithfully follow him in those battles, right? And in this battle, God's doing all the heavy lifting, right? All Moses has to do is keep going back and being the spokesperson. And I think sometimes, I found myself trying to argue people into the kingdom, argue people about morality, argue people about things when it's like arguing with Pharaoh. There's no point if their heart is hardened and you're really just making it worse. So I don't have to, he's a lion and he's a king. He doesn't need me fighting for him. He needs me being obedient to him. And that's a challenge because we want to fight for him, but he has to lead us and he has to direct us. It can't be us fighting without the king telling us to. And so I think that's a big point that I think is helpful here. Moses was willing to continually do whatever God asked him to do. And Pharaoh had to deal with God and not Moses, really. It wasn't Moses making this happen. It was God that was making it happen. All right. What stuck out to you the most about the chapter as a whole? Absolutely. How did God use Moses and Aaron in his plan in this chapter? Yep. Did they do any heavy lifting? No. It was pretty easy. He made it fairly easy for them. They just were there to be part of the plan. They weren't the real crux of the plan, right? What do we learn about Pharaoh in this chapter?
He's getting a little cracking because he's saying you go for 3 days now.
He is a double-minded person. He reacts instead of being proactive. He's always reactive, right? He's always, well, okay, go. No, you can't go, right? What does it say in Proverbs? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, right? He can't make a firm decision because he's too afraid of losing his power, control, and wealth.
And he still wants to be in control.
Yep.
No matter what, he still thinks that he's going to come out ahead.
I wonder if he's wondering how long it will just go on.
Yeah, he may be trying to wait it out.
Yeah, I think
How were the Hebrews and Egyptians affected? Yep. At first, all of them were equally affected negatively. Now, just the Egyptians. I'm wondering how his populate. You know how they do like, here's the president's popularity poll. Here is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is down to 1%. He's the only one shows himself favorable, right? I'm sure he's losing his people. So do we believe God can protect us daily? What were some of the differences between the signs from God and the magicians? What did we find out were the differences?
They can do the same thing, but they can't put it back the way it was.
Yes.
Exactly.
And they were they could do only up to a point.
Right.
They couldn't undo it, and they could only do it up to a point. So it was a fake, a forgery, but it was very limited in how much it could do that. Why is God bringing this judgment on Egypt? These plagues, why is God doing it?
They were cruel to his people,
Right.
more and more and more. And
People were oppressed.
So he wanted to save his people, but also what did he want to do? Reveal his glory. Right? To this day, the Jewish people celebrate these things on Passover. To this day, every year, the Hebrews still talk about how glorious God was in saving them from the Egyptians. Right? If he just saves them in some really easy, quick way, they're not celebrating it to this day. Right? He revealed he is greater than all the other things on earth because he created all the other things on earth. All right, if you were to say what's the main thing that you would spiritually take from this chapter and apply to your life or help others with, what would you say that is?